So, hi everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you to this reading of Almost Island. Today we have a distinguished group of poets who are going to read from their work, and my colleagues are going to introduce them to you. Just to give you some context, all these poets have been published in the last issue of Almost Island magazine, which was themed on the idea of loss. We started thinking about loss, obviously, because of the pandemic and the decay and the death and loss of health and opportunities and income that we saw all around us. But we also wanted to think about loss in a very broad way in terms of loss of cultures, loss of memories, loss of languages, loss of emotions, value systems, how the world is slowly sliding away from us. And the poems that you will hear this evening will resonate with you very much if you keep these themes in mind. With that said, I just want to pass on to my colleague Mantra, who will introduce the first set of poets and what they'll be reading. Thank you.
Thanks, Shaunak. Hi, everyone. I'm really pleased to introduce our poets for the first segment, which is Celerina, Hubert, and their translator, Paul. So Celerina will read first. Celerina Patricia Sanchez Santiago was born in Maison de Guadalupe, Oaxaca. She's a poet, storyteller, and promoter of New Savi culture. She holds a BA in linguistics from Escuela Nacional de Antropología e Historia and has published a number of books and poetry collections, among them Inielchi, which was published by Pluralia in 2013, and Tasu Yuti, which was published by Orali Bura in 2021. In 2019, she was recognized by Oaxaca's legislature for her outstanding work preserving and strengthening indigenous languages in Oaxaca. Our second poet, Hubert Mutiewa, has a degree in philosophy and literature from the Autonomous University of Guerrero, another in creative writing from the Autonomous University of Mexico City, and a MA in Latin American Studies from the Autonomous National University of Mexico. In 2016, he won the Premio Lenguas Originaire Senzolte. In 2017, the fifth Premio de Literature in the Indigenas de América, and the Premio Estadal de Poesía Joven del Estado de Guerrero. He is the author of Piel de Tierra, which was published by Pluralio Edicinio in 2016, and another collection, La Sombre de Testedin, published by University de Guadalajara in Mexico in 2018. He's also the founder of the collaborative venture Gusanos de la Memoria. And now Paul, who very generously gave us their translations for the last issue on loss, is an associate professor of global literature at Western Carolina University. He co-wrote with Rita Palacios his most recent book, Unwriting Maya Literature, Chisibi, as Recorded Knowledge in 2019, and was given an honorable mention for the best book in humanities by LASA's Mexico section. A Fulbright scholar and 2018 winner of the Sturgis Levitt Award from the Southeastern Council on Latin American Studies, he has also translated selected works by indigenous authors such as Hubert Molina, Adriana Lopez, Manuel Chisoc, and Ruperta Bautista. So with that, I welcome Celerina to start with the reading.
Celerina te pasa la bienvenida y pues para que lees los poemas. No te escuchamos.
Oh, perdón. Muchas gracias por la invitación, pues agradecerles y bueno, pues empezaré a leer el primer poema que dice así. Ñu ini, ingayu, nu yokini, tayeyu, racuendan eme, kweyu chanda sama mi kawe yuku, duyusi. Kwe ichiyu, kwe tandasai. Uh-oh. Nishi inindia, mi tu tia nunuyo. Yibi, ni, so, kinindio. Kwenya, ndatabayu, ra, kuniyu. Kwe kuniyu niña aso. Mi tu ndandu kusho. Andibi, nya, nunishi, nzio. Añoranza. Estoy en la ciudad en un andrajo de existencia. No me encuentro. Con los ríos han cambiado por los surcos, por calles pavimentadas, las flores, una resaca de tristezas, agazapadas en los filos de la existencia, piltrafas, cadáveres. Ellas son mi espejo. No quiero saber más, solo busco un pedazo de cielo que me recuerde mi morada. Nda'a, nye'e nda'u, ñanikutu yuku, ri kuku akui asachun, inyoso ra'i inga nunda'u, ñasachun nu'uyo, ra ni kunugu, inyibi tu'u, sikuesta, ntikiso, ndakachu, nduchinu nu'uma, sinu tu'u, sabi, ra kuitagu, chatsana'a, ranchikaba'a tu'ugu inu, rayu'u, kwekunia tabi ni indusuña, ndakani tsa'u, kwenda'u, ñandasaba'a, nishi, nziku si'ilu, kwenda'u, chayu, takweku, kishiyu, ra tsisikigu tsipai, kweitonu ña'a yuku, kwenda'u, ubita suña tsisikitsika, nunu yivi. Manos. Miro tus manos con surcos por los años de trabajo, 1000 canales de vida, manos que han forjado esta tierra. Con tu fuerza has tejido la historia con tortillas, como un poema en la mañana. Lavas tus ojos con humo de un cansancio añejo guardado en tu palabra, y que tu boca no ha querido emitir un eco de queja. Tus manos que han trenzado mis cabellos de niña, tus brazos, refugio de un sueño mal logrado, son tu rebozo. Juega a ser mujer montaña. Tus manos, 2 águilas, juegan a la libertad. Gracias.
Miles de gracias, Celerina. Eso fue tremendo. Y ahora, Uber, con tus poemas. Muchas gracias.
Sí, Bachala Shukya, la Shabotsa Wahyanga, Rigarino Talenumba. Buenos días a todos ustedes que tienen la cicatriz de la palabra en su corazón. Me da mucho gusto compartir con ustedes mi palabra MEPA. Te saludo, Celerina, un abrazo para ti y para Paul.
Gracias,
también,
Uber, gracias, muchas gracias.
Estamos en el mismo idioma, ¿no? Pero bueno, para nosotros los MEPA, decimos, cuando decimos poesía, decimos Nashto Oanga, que significa hacer piel de las palabras, ¿no? Entonces, hacer piel de todo lo que existe es como crearle una identidad donde va a acontecer la vida y el tiempo, ¿no? Y entonces, para mí, lo que he escrito tiene que ver mucho con cómo ha transcurrido mi vida en esta región donde nací, que es en la montaña de Guerrero, y justo por ahí van, por eso mis temáticas tienen que ver mucho con lo que sucede de manera diaria, o lo que veo, o lo que me preocupa, o lo que tengo esperanzas, ¿no? Y entonces, en ese sentido, les voy a leer primero un poema, en MEPA, para que escuchen cómo suena mi idioma, y ya posteriormente voy a leer otros poemas, ya en su versión en español, porque bueno, son varios poemas los que tradujo Paul para tener más, ahorrar mi tiempo, ¿no? Voy a leer este poema que se llama La Amapola. No, perdón, Adda, el niño. Adda. Ni wagi ya en el chapoti juda ma na shwahnyo. Numuri ni gitu shkundo kaminangwe ngu musanyo gami wi chapo. Tetsemana we nyo ja atukwe. Iketina poshuinanda wa shwahnyalo. Iketino riguama na amashkradi. Iketino kushe. Na un camino ni higo ona huba. Shomeka niño rutigu na un rombo. Naiko dirija gotzingina. Kamini niño igi timishti. Na un dombro. Kamini niño na un shekakwe. Timbi nestra caminari tinginalo. Shoma na aun itsu ni karagaha yeidun higo omaruti tinimbashu gahmi. Higo otukwe ninja wenani tushuyom da kami tsiri mashaka ya gone shapo. Shapo tiku dahwa nishunda staino. Kami nistra kembash kami terim bihwa nash papo. Atsu tsakuidoanya na nyaon ikango ikani duni gudin shapo. Mini kiri tingina nenu ishi shapo shwanyo. Numumbiruque, la clinica hiano terizasha bokuba nyahwasho, mahenesho nyahuruqueme, numuruque, tetsenawa shabo, sinagoku dinhi shwahi, camino digako, nañawan hetuque. Bueno, ahora voy a leer el poema justo que también, este poema contextualiza un poco el que tradujiste, Paul, de la casa, ¿no? Entonces tiene que ver con justo la casa y la figura del nado, como la casa también del pueblo y los de los niños, ¿no? De nuestras comunidades. Ahí dice, la casa. A ver, aquí está. La casa. Te encontraron en el nido que dejaron las nubes, te arriaron como el dolor de mi montaña, por los que se van a buscar trabajo y solo encuentran la tumba en los desiertos. Te siguieron en donde frostaste las astas, te llamaron, ayarayo guacha, olfateaste el peligro para ahuyentar el miedo, golpeaste 3 veces la tierra, pediste consejos al aire, solo escuchaste el ronco chiflido y el eco de las mariposas agazapadas en tu pecho. Sigilosos te esperaban, al llegar en la cañada te clavaron la muerte, para que no hubiera duda, regaron tu sangre a los fantasmas de los nidos, colgaron tus orejas en un puente y por si guardabas una palabra, cortaron en pedazos tu lengua, como lo hacen con los muertos de ahora. Lloran mis venaditos en la ciénega, te buscan, mastican tierra para sentir que vuelves, ponen el aliento entre los árboles, la saliva en las piedras para dejar huella de que siguen esperando. Piden al cielo alumbrar el camino para seguir los pasos de quien llenó de ausencia nuestra piel. Preguntan al Señor del monte, ¿quiénes te llevaron y por qué? No existe la policía comunitaria y la reeducación para el mal espíritu que te robó de noche. Quedaron nuestros hijos rayando flores en el lomo de la esperanza. Vagan las caricias mordiendo mi vientre. Te perdí, venado cangrejo. Queda el eco en los cerros. Se viste de rocío en la cueva de mis ojos. Enloqueció mi alma. Se quedó en la olla rebosante de rabia. En las manos de la espina que entierran la ausencia. Se quedó mi voz cegada en la raíz del colorín. En las trancas de la puerta que guardan tu regreso. Te mataron, tú, el de las astas y tambores de guerra. Te arrancaron la piel como lo hacen en Tlapa, en tierra caliente, en el norte y en las costas. Me reconozco en el fuego de las balas, en la angustia de la montaña por escondernos. En cada paso busco tu olor entre los árboles, en la oración de las piedras. Guachá, prestado de lo que nos nombra somos, fieras de nuestro andar distante, en cada boca de noche en las que nacemos en alternado vientre. Recé con tus hijos a la saliva seca para que arda el secreto de las muertes en la montaña. Entregamos al humo las camisas de los desaparecidos, aretes a las cruces sin nombre, para que renazcan las pezuñas en la tierra y los cuernos vuelvan a tallar los árboles. Adornamos con algodón tu frente, con piedras del espejo, las cuencas de tus ojos, para que no traigan la enfermedad y no provoquen la locura de los años. Te curamos para mirar la montaña, reconstruimos tus pies para que sigas brincando en los ríos. Pedimos perdón a tu carne, que no se amarre de dolor ni se duela tu cielo. Dile a tu padre que te traten bien. Te ofrendé tortillas del primer maíz, te di de beber, te coroné con flores, te recibí con la nube suave, con la nube dulce, con la nube tierna. Cuéntales, Inmicuí, de las larvas que polulan nuestros cuerpos, del hedor de las pozas, de los halcones que destazan serpientes, de las martas que cargan conejos bajo las piedras, en las esquinas y en los mares. Entrega la sangre a quien escuche esta voz, al del colmillo dorado y al águila de dos cabezas. Bajen los cielos, abran los tiempos y levanten nuestra sombra de la tierra. Se lleven el hambre de la carne, sequen la sed de sangre y regresen nuestros ojos a sus cuencas. Tú, Shasha, Midihami, viniste a la casa donde vivo con tus hijos, donde estoy con nuestros hombres. Te encargamos el desamparo que nos habita. Ofrezco mi ombligo, la voz que va creciendo, los pasos enterrados para que no nos desaparezcan, ni aten las manos y dejen en la basura. Entrego el huérfano vientre para sembrar el pensamiento, el caracol tierno para escondernos de los camaleones que visten de veneno las tardes, para entrar en el monte sin que nos revienten. Ofrezco la lengua de la primera casa, la que baja del dolor y rasga las orejas de los que no escuchan. Bueno, gracias.
Excellent. So now I will read the translations of those poems. And so before I get going here, I just want to say, again, what an honor it is to be here today. Thank you again for sharing your space. And right now I'm speaking to you from Boone, North Carolina, which is located in the territory of the Cherokee and the Catawba. And so, you know, indigenous languages, I think, as we all know, right, as the Mexican linguist Yasnaya Aguilar Gil puts it, right, are being murdered, right, by their states. And so this is something I have a meeting next week to try to bring the teaching of Cherokee to my campus. So, pues saludos a Uber y a Celerina otra vez. Muchas gracias por compartir la palabra con nosotros aquí en este espacio tan importante. Yo simplemente les dije que en este momento estoy hablando a todos, ¿no? Desde el territorio de los Catawba y los Cherokee, ¿no? Porque como todos sabemos, en este momento, como dice la compa Yasnaya, los idiomas pues se están matando, ¿no? Y pues hay que cuidarlos, ¿no? Hay que protegerlos. Y en la actualidad yo tengo una reunión la semana que viene precisamente para facilita la enseñanza del Cherokee aquí en mi campus, ¿no? Que sería muy importante y un gran logro. So once again, Celerina, when she was introducing her poems, she said, thank you to everybody for the invitation, for being here. And again, right, for sharing your space. And when she read both the poems in Tu'un Yusavi or Mixteco, as well as in Spanish. I work primarily, obviously, from the Spanish, and I'm going to read both of these poems. So the first one, Nostalgia. In the city, I can't find myself in the rags of my life. The rivers have become cars, the furrowed fields paved streets, the flowers a sad hangover, huddled on the edge of living scraps. Cadavers are my mirrors. I do not want to know anymore. I'm just looking for a bit of sky that reminds me of home. And then the second poem is entitled Hands. I look at your hands that have been plowed by years of labor, 1,000 channels for life, hands that have forged the earth with your strength. You've woven history with tortillas. Like a poem, every morning you wash your eyes with smoke, rising from your words echoing exhaustion. Your mouth never having uttered even an echo of complaint. Your fingers that braided my childhood hair. Your arms that are a refuge from bad dreams. With your rebozo, you pretend to be a woman mountain. Your hands, two eagles, pretending to be free. So pivoting from Celerina's work to Huber's work. Huber, who also does a lot of work in MEPA philosophy, was just talking about, what poetry is for him, what it means for him, writing, things that are his dreams, desires, worries, living in the mountains of Guerrero, where he lives. And he said that in MEPA, the term that they use to describe poetry, to talk about poetry, would actually be literally translated as giving skin or flesh to words. And what that means, right, is an approach to art and how that influences him, right, in what he tries to do. So then in the interest of time, he did not read the longer poem published in Almost Island in MEPA. And so he gave us a shorter poem, which is Ada, El Niño. I translated into English as The Boy. And so I'll share that. And then the poem that he read in Spanish, The First Kill, I'll read that one as well. So The Boy. And it gives some context, right, to the poem La Primera Casa, the first kill. The boy. They came to town to look for him because there was nowhere else to find him and send him to fight their enemies. We got used to seeing buzzards scavenging on the outskirts of town, tearing down clothes from the fences and searching through their underskirts, looking for meat. He left his marbles in the town square along a line clouded by nostalgia, left the multicolored fish with their evening dreams, and left misery swinging among the coffee trees. The sobs of his friends, the daughters of Mrutsi, grew in his bones as they begged the dust and the stones for him not to be taken. They masked him with the afternoon and hung an AK-47 on him, 3 handmade rosaries with deer's eyes, and sent him out to hunt men, to eat with death at the table. Ever since then, they've said that we people from the mountain are good for that, and they haven't stopped carrying off our young boys, sewing death in their hands. And so then the following poem, entitled The First Kill. They found you in a nest that the clouds had left, and they urged you on, like the pain of my mountain, for those who go to look for work and only find their graves in the desert. They followed you to where you rubbed your antlers, calling you, Araicha do Wadsha, Araicho do Wadsha. You smelled the danger, and to drive away your fear, you struck the ground 3 times. You sought the counsel of the air, and only heard hoarse whistling and the echoing butterflies huddled in your chest. They silently waited for you, and when you got to the pass, they beat you to death. There was no doubt they spilled your blood on the nest's ghosts, hung your ears from a bridge, and in case you still had any words, they cut up your tongue like they tend to do with the dead these days. My little deer weeping in the swamp, they are looking for you. They are chewing earth to sense your return. They breathe among the treetops. They spit on the rocks as a reminder that they are still waiting. They ask the sky to light the way so they can follow in the footsteps of the one whose absence fills our skin. They ask the Lord of the forest, who took you and why? And don't the community police and re-education exist to stop an evil spirit who stole you in the dead of the night? Our children were left scratching flowers on the hill of hope. Caresses wander chewing on my insides. I've lost you, little crab deer. There's only an echo among the hilltops, dew speckled in the caverns of my eyes. My soul went crazy, an overflowing bowl of rage in the hands of the thorns that bury absence. My voice went blind at the roots of the colorín, at the sticks of the door that guarded your return. They killed you, you of the antlers and the drums of war. They skinned you like they do in Tlapa, in Tierra Caliente, in the north, and down along the coast. I recognize myself in the bullet's fire, in the mountain's anguished desire to save us. I look for your smell in every step along the trees and in the rocks' prayers, Wadsha, borrowed from that which names us. We are beasts from our distant journeying in each of the night's mouths, where we are born from different wombs. I prayed over the dried saliva with your children, so that the secret of the deaths in the mountains would burn. We gave the disappeared shirts to the smoke, earrings to the nameless crosses, so that their hooves would be reborn on the earth and their horns would return to carve the trees. We adorned your forehead with cotton, the basins of your eyes with mirrory rocks, so that they wouldn't bring illness or further stroke the madness of these years. We cure you to see the mountain. We rebuild your feet so that you can keep jumping through the rivers. We beg your flesh for forgiveness so that it's not lashed with pain or wounds the sky. We tell your father that I treated you well. I offered you tortillas made from the first corn. I gave you drink. I crowned you with flowers. I received you with soft clouds, sweet clouds, tender clouds. Tell the people in Mukui about the larvae that multiply in our bodies, about the foul-smelling puddles, about falcons that butcher serpents, about the martins that carry rabbits behind the stones and on the corners in the ocean. Bring blood to those here who hear my voice, to the one with the golden tooth and the double-headed eagle. Bring down the sky, open up time, and raise our earthly shadow. Carry away this hunger for flesh, remove this thirst for blood, return our eyes to their cradles. You, Shasha, my Dijamia, you came to the house where I live with your children, where I am with our men. We put you in charge of the abandonment dwelling within us. I offer my belly, my growing voice, my buried footsteps so they won't disappear. Bind our hands and leave them in the trash. I bring the orphaned womb to sow thought, the smooth snail shell so we can hide from the chameleons who dress in venom in the afternoons. I will bury these in the woods before they can find us. My offering, the tongue of the first kill, which descends from the pain and tears at the ears of those who do not listen. Thank you.
Really beautiful.
Thank you so much, Salrina, Hubert, and Paul. That was incredible. And now pass on to Bharat so that he can introduce Sharadeep.
Thanks, Matra. So very quickly, Sharadeep Roy is a writer, translator, and academic, and one of the co-editors of all this title. He's currently working on a play based on the 1943-44 Bengal famine, titled How to Make Rice, which is due to premiere in London in 2022. His earlier play and translation, A Brief Loss of Sanity, was published in the bilingual journal Korab. He's also working on his PhD at Queen Mary University of London, where he's writing a history of the Bengal unit of the Indian People's Theatre Association in the 1940s and the group theatre movement thereafter. We're very happy to have you here, shortly.
Thanks very much, Bharat. I think I lost you at certain points, so I'll just quickly recap what you was trying to say. I'm currently in London. I'm trying to do a PhD on, and I'm writing at this moment a history of what is known as the group theatre movement in Bengal, and just the movement prior to that from the 1940s, called the Gananatya Andolan, which is in English it's often called the Indian People's Theatre Association. This particular poem that I will be also sharing with, I'll be sharing the screen as I'm reading, has several references to, in some senses, the first modern production of a modern Bengali play, Nabanno, written by the Bengali playwright Bijan Bhattacharya. Bharat, I see that the host has disabled screen sharing. Do you mind giving that privilege to me?
Yeah, I think you should be able to do it now.
Yeah. All right. So this is called It Will Come Back, an elegy. Death will come back unannounced like a sudden Kalboishaki in the month of April, like plague in cold December. It will go away too. but it will come back. It will come back as a person missing. It will come back. 2. It will come back as a memory, sharp as a blade, as it snows outside the British Library after a day of research on the Bengal famine. The memory. The missing person's head bobbing like a corkscrew in water, his heart being pushed with all the strength in the nurse's arms. It will come back as a message, confident as a sermon on the top of a mountain. Prepare for his death. It's unlikely he'll survive. 3. It will come back through the body and through sound archived on camera. Bijon Bhattacharya staring at the camera with a raised finger saying, I accuse in Meghe Dhaka Tara. The missing person will call from the hospital after his plot for killing himself has failed. I accuse you, he will say to his children, his wife, his in-laws, to whoever he can catch hold of. Indeed, to the world. I accuse all of you. He will possess Kali's wrath. His tongue is her fangs. He will say with clarity, perhaps in a moment of extraordinary clarity, I accuse all of you. Here he is, Lear-like, standing on his heath, his bed in the hospital, giving his final sermon. I accuse all of you. The final sermon is body and sound. 4. His wife will respond in body and sound. She will cry almost on cue, a cry that exceeds reality. The calm, indifferent modernist lyric which escapes from emotion, the unobtrusive realist camera, the fourth wall of naturalist theater, all will fail as forms to capture her cry. It needs a new form. For this is a cry that experiences pain over generations, not singularly, or perhaps experiences the singularity of a collective generational pain. Singe scheming women experience grief socially, collectively, after the waves have taken their men, brave riders to the sea, into the next world. Both Bijon Bhattacharya and Ritwik Ghatak were aware of this. The form for the missing person's wife's singular, collective cry is melodrama. 5. How to give form to collective grief is the question. How to think of death as a collective feeling is the question. Not death that comes with the stoic silence of modern elegies, but death that bursts like water from an open dam, destroying years of collective agriculture. Not the singularity of death, but its collectivity. Not the death of a person, but the death of a missing person. Don't worry, it'll all come back. Come back as a dream. 6. Glimpse of Lakshmi in a dream. She says to Binondo, a cowherd, Dear child, I understand your pain. I have heard your cry as I was on a journey in the sky. Narayan was also with me. Here, take these seeds. Sow them when the rain sets in. Fruits will ripen, become golden like my body, will smell as lovely and as sweet as me. My being will come out in the fruit. No pain is everlasting. You will find abundance. 7. It will come back as the rain, the abundant rain that will fall on your skin, ailing from the harsh London winter, and heal it as you arrive back home and make your way to a government pension office. On your way, you will pass by the governor's residence in Dalhousie, and then it will come back as an image. During the famine, dead bodies were perched on the high railing so that the government finally paid attention to the famine, not just to the war. It will come back as a vision, as a collective cry, Than It will come back as the rain. 8. Intermission. Long shot, affluent government officers, both white and brown, stepping over bodies of the dead to make their way to a restaurant. 9. It will come back as an image from the Shoshan Ghat. Meet the dome, meet the Brahmin priest, meet caste in all its glory. 3 dead bodies united in their communion for a final wail, an interment of bones, skin, hair. The missing person's daughter stroking his feet, weeping calmly in the long wait, saying, Baba, tumi chole gele. Bijon appears here, looks at the scene and says, "It may sound strange, but I see a poignant hope here. As his body is waiting to be burnt, he is waiting for his final meal. His daughter's nimble fingers, trained for centuries to roll rice into balls, will roll the grain with the crushed banana and offer it to him. After his body is interred, he will come back as a pindo, as the unburnt. Perhaps he is hiding in a pond near the crematorium as we speak. His daughter will go to the Ganga, get some Ganga jal in an earthen pot. He will keep waiting until his daughter pours water over the pindo, turns away from the unburnt remains, and breaks the pot. Now he will depart with the nameless blackbirds into the sky. O eternal sky, O eternal sky, O sky."
Thank you, Sharadeep, for that wonderful reading. My mic's a little fickle. I hope I'm more audible this time round. So Sharadeep, if you would please introduce our next two readers now. I hand it over to you.
Thanks very much, Bharat. It gives me immense pleasure to now introduce Amit Majumdar. His newest novels in India are The Map and the Scissors, a historical novel about the rivalry between Jinnah and Gandhi, and Heroes, The Color of Dust, that is a children's book. A memoir will be released in the United States, Twin A, as well as an epic retelling to be released in India, the Mahabharata trilogy. Very happy to have you, Amit, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Sharadeep.
It's Majumdar, Sharadeep. It's not the Bengali Majumdar, but it's Majumdar. It's a little
it's the Gujarati version. Not a problem. It's a very common confusion there. And I'm sure someone with the last name Roy would 100% assume it was Majumdar. Not a problem. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for that introduction. And all the readers are just flooringly brilliant tonight or today. And I'm going to read a few excerpts from the poems that appeared in Almost Island, and then also two small excerpts from another poem that's part of the larger cluster of poems that is published in Almost Island. And what I published in that with Sharmishta's such a kind hosting of that work are these Vedic hymns that aren't translations from the Vedic Sanskrit, but they're reinventions of these hymns for the modern world, in which, you know, they address each one of these gods. Agni, Vacha, the goddess of speech. Agni, everyone knows, is the god of fire. I'll also read a couple of small pieces from the hymn to Yama, because our theme is loss. So I thought that I would cluster all that together. And I think I'll open with the first section of the poem that of the hymn to the goddess of speech, because it's kind of it can serve as an invocation. And that goes like this. Make my tongue the scythe in a garden of liars. Make my tongue a tunnel through water to smuggle my sculpted gods to safety. Make my tongue the bright spoon where the whole sky lies pooled. Make my tongue both brandy and bitters, acetylene and oxygen, torpedo and flare gun, knife and pomegranate, truth and dare. Make my tongue a backlash that slices the whip hand off at the wrist. Make my tongue a flash flood, arcing out of a conch shell 10 centuries on the same shelf. Make my tongue strange to myself. And I think Sharadeep had a beautiful culminating image in his sequence about the cremation rites. And so I'm going to read these two sections from the hymn to Agni, the god of fire, that kind of dovetail with that, because Agni is what
that final loss, the marker of that loss is that which burns us away. So this is an excerpt from the hymn to Agni, where I address the god of fire. I want to sculpt you out of what you are, but my hands are scared of how you scour and scar the hubris that would hold you, much less shape you. You take the form of what cannot escape you away. You take its colors too, to all one gray. I say your name and almost call you agony. Maker, in your image may I be unmade. I know by end of day, you'll be the killing kiln, my lumpen clay placed on the pyre, fired. All I pray for is an afterlife inside a star. Agni, sculpt me into what you are. And here's another section from the same poem that culminates with Sanskrit epithets of Agni that are found in the Vedas, in the Rig Veda. But it begins with a musical riff on various types of fire. So that's what you'll be hearing in the beginning. And then it culminates on the way that the ancient Vedic rishis said fire. Flammable amethyst, blastocyst ablaze in amniotic fuel, renewal. Phoenix feather quill pen tipped with an acetylene nib, agnition, ancient engine, kindling's kindred, king of the mandala, the hunger at its center, pollen spark, ethereal Catherine wheel that is a star thinking, plethora of epithets, and yet, they dim before the Sanskrit ones, the funnest ones to say, Saptajivi, seven-tongued, Bhavaka, purifier, Vanir, one who spirits things away. And I'll finish with two sections from the hymn to Yama. And these are, I picked because they're kind of fun to read. The first section maybe has what would be today considered an obscure literary source that it plays with or plays off of, which, it's actually from Shakespeare, from Romeo and Juliet. It's Queen Mab's speech. And so there's this point in Romeo and Juliet where Mercutio goes into this elaborate description of Queen Mab, who is this fairy queen, and how she has this little chariot made of this and that and the other. And I thought it would be fun to play with that idea of the pictorial description of Queen Mab and turn it into a pictorial description of King Yama. And so you'll hear where it's, why then you'll know Queen Mab has been with you. That's a line from Shakespeare, and then that has a little echo in this particular passage from the hymn to Yama. And so this is a section from that, okay? Reconnaissance. You'll know he's made a pass when dentures fizz and tremble in the glass, and hot breath silvers all the window panes. When knuckles wake to achy morning pain, when knuckles wake to achy morning rains, and spider webs are strung with blood drop dew, why, then you know King Yama's whispered through, eyeing your bed as florists eye their roses with pruning scissors tilted. Garden hoses freeze to the faucet on a summer night. Fireflies spill their final jewels of light in constellations littering the lawn. A dreamer sits up breathless to find him gone, or never stirs again beneath the covers. Old couples drift off like Pompeian lovers under the sifting ashes of a dream. They whimper once, but never think to scream. His clump of damp chew tucked behind his lip, a trucker swears as he scrapes the rumble strip. The clock strikes none. A doctor hears an owl. A banker gasps, and it's his last withdrawal. King Yama has both pinkies tipped with white from tasting powders in the night. He ferries heroin cross-country in a hearse, and OxyContin cut with something worse, and all the dusts that turn a man to dust. The snapped-off needle ripens in its pus, the addict's forearm growing warm as spring. The pollen that precludes all flowering, King Yama sheds like skin cells where he goes. He finches eggs to feed his crows. You wake to his boot prints melting in the hall, if you are lucky enough to wake at all. And finally, I'll finish with a poem that is very much a poem of loss, because it plays on basically the variety of forms of death. And so this is the another section from the Hymn to Yama. Death before the birth could happen. Death to teach the rest a lesson. Death on a graph or traced in chalk. Death by Smith and death by Wesson. Death by incompetence, ancient tech furred like a tongue with rust. Death by meth of mythic money, no God in whom we trust. Death by distraction, baking shows with naught but a bone to gnaw. Death to the out-group, shout the in-group. Death by corvid, caw, caw, caw. Death of Eros grunting on a screen. Good death or bad, it remains to be seen. Death by the virus or death by vaccine. Natural death by unnatural means. The soul is immortal. Scientists announce, except they're lying. Death by superhero. It's death by superhero movie. Sell me the sequel. Sell me the tie-in. Death by painkiller. Death by Tuesday. Death by dearth or death by glut. Death of the past by way of no one can remember what. Death by hanging. Sneakers twitchy. The medics tie the laces. Death by doxing, anonymous profiles suddenly cursed with faces. Death by famine, death by fame, death for want of trying. Dead or alive, unwanted, haunted, we are dying, America, dying. Thank you very much.
Amit, in India, we would say, kya baat hai. That's what I felt like saying. So.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Amit Majmudar. And I apologize for the very Bengali appropriation of your surname. I'm also giving a Zoom clap to you for that absolutely wonderful reading and a very interesting Amitization of Shakespearean verse in one of the poems. Our next poet is Arisitas. Arisitas had joined us in person in Almost Island, and I remember his absolutely terrific in-person reading a couple of years ago before the pandemic. He's a poet, dramatist, and sociologist who is also involved lately in musical work in and around the Indian Ocean. His first poetry collection, Tropical Scars, was published in 1989 and has subsequently seen another 7 volumes published, the last of which was a dialogue with the Bengali poet Shubhra Bandyopadhyay titled Mapping Gondwana. This particular work appeared this year. His work has been translated into many languages. Some of his sociological and creative work has been published by Tulika Press in Delhi, in India. His latest production was the staging of Giraffe Humming, a musical and visual reconstruction of the tale of the movie of three giraffes from Africa to Bengal and then to China in 1414 CE. He has been awarded the, help me pronounce this, Ari, he has been awarded the Order of Mapungubwe.
Yeah.
Okay, close. By the South African presidency in 2019 for his contribution to scientific and creative work. Very, 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 very excited to have you, Ari, once again in Almost Island, this time, although virtually. Looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, and just how do I follow all these fantastic poems that have been performed this evening. Anyway, what I will do is read what has been published in Almost Island. And they are about loss. They are part of a broader work that moves around South Africa inch by inch, trying to measure what's happened to the dream we once had. So it's various stages of the journey. And the first one is an arrival by the Indian Ocean. It's an Indian Ocean reverie. A score of ocean cruisers in bloom on a restless sea, cut fresh from the sickle of the Ramadan moon. I admonish the waves to keep quiet, keep quiet. My brain still throttles from the sound of engines and clatter that took me down cliffs, past the mountains, past fields of proteas on fire. A sip from my flask and I murmur a deep holy thank you to the wild olive and fig tree that gave me some shelter, and aggravated dreams of nymphs with braids and streaks of gold in the hair by the dark feinbos tinted streams. And I admonish the waves once again, bloody hell, finally give these fishermen some flowers. I traveled among prehistoric rocks, and I did so in pelting hail or iced up dew, up down endless hills and carved my name on an anthill. I was involved in grand heroic acts like that. And now the ocean turns dark and dangerous. I traveled far with a broken compass. The handlebars ate at my palm and the stockings scarred me. I left large footprints on the red earth when I went to piss. And who knows, one day, someone will reconstruct my shoes. I traveled. I heard both shouts and songs from one homestead to another, and sometimes stopped just to pretend I needed something, just to hear someone talk, so I could also hear my voice talk. Words are funny things. They vanish in the wind. The sand here is pure velvet, and by the shiny rocks out there, I see pups chasing their mom to suckle. There is, I'm sure, someone who cares whether they do. I do not know whether anyone cares I walked or crawled this way, unless it is about begging a fag or two. We're all beggars. There is no chapel. This is the chapel, the temple, and the mosque. I traveled. This road has no end. And here, your memories are rather dumb. They get in the way. The thorn trees are growing fast inside your head in geometric leaps. The wound in the distance from the moon's sickle has opened up for rays. The sun is up. The dew on my tires will dry. Our turn will come. And then a homeless shroud, which is a response to Walt Whitman. I'm there carting a corpse, unsure about the proper placing of the grave as we roar along, eating up landscape. The journey's bike, a constant pallbearer of a dream, dragging its shroud, village to city, from avenue to highway and back, through unforgiving seasons and the deep fog descending on this land, as if it needs to hide flags, cavalcades of hideous greed and gaudy trimmings, province to province. The windows of all them gone, lining the streets veiled with umbrellas and uncountable drum majorettes, marching with bands bleating. I see no vigils for the dream, unless I misread the rows of youths lining the streets for mourners. I find no station to rest the shroud. The downcast look of people is always for something else more important elsewhere. The laments, the guitars, and even treacherous metallic bows are chartered. And the comradeships of voice, polyphonies, and embellishments so resonant in the deep night, the split-tone voice, falsetto alto-like, are rented out. Not even the churches and the outfield congregations, the clapping and the clamor and the chant, they belong elsewhere. And the muezzin's voice sounds like an ad break. I drive my shroud past valleys of audacious Namaqua daisies. I do it in the day when their eyes are not quite shut. So I give them flowers. And then the return poem, the parts are greater than the whole, coming back home to Cape Town. Wretched land, I know you, you took me in joyless, wretched land. Lit starkly, wind-lashed land of toppled sculptures, face planted in the grass. Solitude, chains, discord, bowed land. I'm sitting in your lap, drinking star juice, puzzling still over the math. How were the foundations laid on the void, on the blood of slaughtered goats? And how long does it take for the dead to ripen? I bring you keen eardrums, gestures, smoke signals, if you please, blunt sounds, blunt. No one has cut the bamboo yet, no sigh, no consonant click, ripped land, ripped timber, ripped from forest people. A sack full of skin or stars. The workshops have tried to snuff out beauty, wretched land. How long does it take for the dead to ripen? I return alone. On the wheel, still traces of jacaranda petals. In my lungs, the scent of the wild daisy, and in my eyes, herons preening on the wheat field. I gave color to the flower, I thought, and a strange tune to the makeshift flute. I painted each sunshine red. I painted the landscape blood red. I have felt the storms. I have felt hail. I counted the distress and hunger, didn't I? I weighed up enemy and friend, didn't I? And I sent messages that went nowhere. They just kept me good company by the campfire. I lost 2 teeth. I trumpeted loud in the lunchtime haze. I learned how hearts are iron and manganese. I iced my brain. My memory was filled with homes, and I prophesied crops, but I harvested them alone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ari. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ari, indeed. And before I hand it over to Sharmishta, I see we actually have around 30 minutes. That's what
I was just going to say that, yes. So if anyone wants to ask questions, we can just have a conversation, I think, Shoradeep, maybe. I mean,
there was something Hubert asked in the chat, which is if any of the poems read out are, I think, available in Spanish. I wonder if Ari or Amit's work are available in translations. Yeah.
I just, wanted to say before we started talking that, I mean, this was just stunning. Each and every poet, just stunning, stunning work. And I'm really very deeply moved by all of your work. Just wanted to say that before we went on to questions, really. So we can just kind of have an informal conversation between ourselves. If anyone has questions or comments or whatever. It's quite an opportunity. So I don't know if my team would like to ask some questions to these fantastic poets. No.
Sure, I have a question for Shoradeep. Could you tell us about your work in drama and the play that you're working on?
I'm currently also sort of writing a fairly straightforward play on the Bengal famine and trying to look at, say, the ethics of looking at some of the archives that are already available. Some of the, so as I said, the famine is in some senses the first time that we see in Bengali literature where a contemporary event finds a literary representation. And this is not just in drama, but also in stories and other literary forms. And there's no way that, like, I feel that the foundation of modern literature in Bangla rests on the famine. So the play that, this is a separate work, but the play that I'm working on is sort of, it will be premiered in London. So I thought it will be interesting to think of London as a space where some of very crucial decisions were made where, which resulted in the famine in Bengal, and what it means to sort of be in London. And the play, by the way, will be performed in a Bengali festival. It's called A Season of Bangla Drama, which has been running in East London for more than I think almost 15 years now. So I will be speaking to audience which will primarily be, I'm hoping South Asian, or at least South Asian, African, etc., the sort of community here in East London. So that's the play. I'm thinking of, it's called How to Make Rice. So once again, starts off from a very obsession, like a very typical Bengali obsession with rice, and then takes us to the lack of rice, which resulted in sort of this massive, important calamitous event, and then also an outpouring of literature, which is again built crucially on the loss of rice, lack of rice.
And it was a totally man-made famine, which, you know, some of you may know, but totally man-made by our colonizers at that point. So it's a very crucial landmark.
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember reading about that a lot. I had a question for Paul. What was your journey arriving to Spanish? How did you become a Spanish translator? What was your how did you end up where you are now?
Thank you. That's a really great question. So in terms of that, I came to translation, if I could say this, kind of through the back door, right? I first, I have a doctorate in comparative literature and was doing research, right, on a lot of indigenous authors, right, primarily from the Maya area in southern Mexico and Guatemala. And one of the things ethically you start thinking about, right, is, okay, so I'm doing this research, I'm based in the global north in the United States, right? This is kind of my position. But, I'm making my living, right? Like publishing primarily in English, right? This is what the North American Academy requires us to do. And so speaking with authors who are not just authors, right? They're also colleagues and friends. Like, what would you like to see out of my work, right? Like even beyond like presenting in Spanish, translating academic work into Spanish. And time and again, right? The answer was, I would really like to see my work in English, right? So that it reaches a global audience. And in particular, like thinking specifically about like Uber's work or Celerina's work, like Uber's work speaks directly to the intimate connections. In the United States, you would think of these places as being rural. The connection, right, between, the drug trade, right, and how this impacts in the United States, this is invisible, right? And so, there's an urgency there, right? Even though, I've studied Yucatec Maya, I've studied Tzotzil, which is another Maya language. I've never studied Mepa. Then just working with Uber, working with Celerina in some of these languages that I don't speak, haven't studied, to send, like bring that in and to bring it to a global audience, right? I think I did 3 years as an assistant editor at Asymptote, and then have kind of continued along that trajectory. So it's a fantastic question. Thank you. And if you don't mind, Uber has his hand up. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Okay. Uber, tu pregunta es primero en español y lo interpreto para los compañeros y ya. Es que me preguntaron acerca de la traducción y se los expliqué. Sigue Uber.
Más bien era como un comentario, ¿no? Sobre todo este tema sobre la hambruna, que me parece es fundamental en la poesía, porque justo para mi pueblo incluso hay una poética de la hambruna, ¿no? Esta poética de la hambruna que consiste en justo expulsar la hambruna en las comunidades a través de la poesía, ¿no? De hecho, los poetas que se encargan, digamos, de hacer este tipo de poética se llama poéticas de la hambruna, ¿no? Para nosotros la hambruna es una deidad y básicamente nuestro mundo se divide en dos lados, dos pieles, por decirlo de esa manera, el tiempo de la hambruna y el tiempo de la lluvia. O sea, la hambruna es como el tiempo del hambre, de las sequías y todo, y el tiempo de la lluvia donde ya crece el alimento y todo eso, ¿no? Pero también cómo es que la hambruna es tan importante en las sociedades que ha movido, ¿no? Sociedades, ¿no? Así también como la cultura MEPA, tienen una variante, por decir, una migración hacia Centroamérica, justo por motivos entre guerras, en las cuales también está la hambruna, ¿no? O sea, lo relacionado a la hambruna, pues es muy amplio, me parece, y es muy importante ese tema, a mi manera de ver, relacionado con las guerras, con el tiempo, con la naturaleza, o sea, muchas cosas, ¿no? Así era como un comentario, ¿no? Que me encantaría leer su obra en español, ¿no? Gracias.
Perfecto. Y se lo voy a interpretar. So Uber was saying it's kind of like a comment more than a question. Sort of outside of the chat, I've been interpreting and translating a lot of what we've been doing on Facebook Messenger, right? So that Uber and Celerina could follow a little bit of the conversation. And speaking specifically about famine, right? And its importance. So he was saying that this appears, something that, is fundamental in terms of like how it shows up through art. And he was saying that, kind of summarizing some of this in Mefa, right? They kind of divide things. There's the rainy period, and then there is the period of hunger, right? And it's seen as two sides. And he actually again used the expression, right? Kind of two skins, right? That one has, and particularly in the world we live now, right? The period of hunger, including famine, being caused not just by nature, right, but man-made things like we were talking about earlier, specifically war, right, which then produces movement of people, right? He was mentioning migration both to the United States and to Central America. And that in Mefa communities, right, one of the things that's really important is a lot of indigenous communities in the America in general, right? The word is understood as doing something. The word is understood as acting, right? And so when one cares for one's word, right? Because to speak is to do things, right? In at least, in the Euro-Western tradition, there's a separation there, but speaking is doing, right? And so he's saying, that there's also a poetics of hunger, right? And the use of poetic language specifically to try to drive out hunger, right? Particularly within Mefa communities, right? And so he's, incredibly interested in the play that you're working on, and hopes that he can read it in Spanish at some point. He would love to engage with that. So thank you.
That's beautiful, what he said.
I had a, Sharmishta, go ahead. No, I had a question. So I think, Hubert, you said something about poetry being language given flesh. I'm paraphrasing poorly, but I think it was something along those lines. And I was wondering if he'd like to say a little bit more about what he meant by that and how he approaches his writing in the light of that.
Perfecto. Yeah, so I'll translate that then. Entonces, Uber, el compañero dice que cuando tú estabas al principio de presentar a tus poemas, tú mencionaste que en el MEPFA, ¿no? Una expresión para decir poesía es hacer piel a las palabras, ¿no? Y pues la pregunta del compañero es que si tú puedes explicar un poco más, ¿no? ¿Qué significa eso para ti, ¿no? O sea, mente eso qué es, qué significa.
Sí. Sí, bueno, de entrada, para nosotros la cultura MEPA, pues todo lo que existe tiene piel, ¿no? Así como todo lo que tiene aliento, tiene corazón, para nosotros la piel es como la deidad más importante, ¿no? Y entonces, como todo lo que nombramos tiene piel, eso tiene, digamos, su implicación, así como la piel cuida al cuerpo, ¿no? Cuando nosotros somos niños nos hacen una ceremonia que se llama Ashtamba, que significa, se traduce como piel de tierra. Entonces a un niño lo transforman en la piel de la tierra, porque justo cuando se transforma en esa ceremonia implica que él se hace de ese lugar donde se supone que nace y tiene un hermano animal. Entonces ese niño es a la vez tierra, es a la vez su otro hermano animal y a la vez es él mismo, ¿no? Entonces eso implica una responsabilidad con el entorno, o sea, una responsabilidad de cuidado, ¿no? En ese sentido, para nosotros la piel lo que significa justo eso de esa relación recíproca con la naturaleza, con todo lo que vive en relación al cuidado, de hacernos responsables en donde estamos. Por eso justo para nosotros la palabra también habitar, por ejemplo, es estar como en la piel, ¿no? Entonces somos piel en el lugar donde nosotros territorializamos, por decirlo de esa manera. Y en cuanto a la poesía, tiene que ver con hacer piel de las palabras, porque todo lo que nosotros se hace piel sirve para perdurar, ¿no? O sea, se amarran las palabras porque en las poéticas existen justo en las ritualidades, ¿no? Y ahí los encargados lo que hacen es amarrar palabras o hacer piel de las palabras. Pero esto significa que cuando hacen esto es para que una palabra perdure y proteja a la comunidad. Entonces se pide lluvia para que haya alimento, ¿no? Se expulsa la hambruna para que haya vida, ¿no? Entonces, la palabra está enfocada a cuidar la vida dentro de la comunidad. Y hacer piel de las palabras significa justo ir como amarrando eso para proteger la vida dentro de la comunidad a través de la palabra, ¿no? No sé si te confundí más, pero más o menos por ahí va la idea, ¿no?
Y entonces esa última parte, o sea, para ir amarrando la palabra y la última parte que fue, o sea, para proteger la comunidad y para que perdure,
Sí,
¿no?
exacto. Mira, justo,
Okay.
o sea, la piel tiene la función de cuidar a lo que lo protege, ¿no? Lo que lo contiene, ¿no? Entonces, hacer piel de las palabras, pues tiene el sentido de amarrar palabras, o sea, hacer piel, para garantizar, proteger la vida. ¿Y cómo se hace eso? Pues, en la hambruna se hace una piel de palabras, o sea, una poética de la hambruna, ¿no? Para expulsar el hambre dentro de la comunidad con la finalidad de cuidar la vida ahí, ¿no? O cuando se hace una piel de palabras para pedir la lluvia, pues se amarran esas palabras para que la lluvia llegue y exista alimento y garantice la continuidad de la cultura. Y entonces, en cada uno de esos espacios para nosotros es muy fundamental. Entonces, la palabra está enfocada al cuidado de la vida, ¿no? En ese sentido, hacer piel de las palabras es como crearle un cuerpo donde va a acontecer la vida de la comunidad.
Perfecto. No, mil gracias, Hugo. Voy a hacer mi mejor intento para interpretar todo esto. So I'm gonna, do my absolute best to interpret, because this is a really fantastic question. So backing out for just a moment from the meat of the question, right? So in Metfa culture, everything that exists has breath, or excuse me, has skin, right? It has breath, it has life. And so, skin itself in this context, right, is a really important divinity, right? In thinking about like how we exist, because the skin itself cares for the body. And so it's setting up a whole series of relationships there that I'll talk, briefly about. For example, when a child is born, they hold a specific ceremony in Metfa communities called Shtamba. which literally translates as earthen skin, right? Skin of the earth. And in this particular ceremony, the child becomes part of the earth, right? And it's not sort of earth in English, right, in the broad sense, right? It's earth in a very specific locality, a very specific place. And so in this ceremony, right, the becoming part of the earth, so the child is located in this specific place and becomes part of it, right? The child and the place are the same thing. The child also receives their animal twin, right? In central Mexico, what we refer to as Mesoamerica, the notion of the animal twin, that is also the same thing as the person, right? Is a notion held by a number of communities. And then, of course, at the same time, the child is also the child itself, right? So all of these three things exist simultaneously at the same time and are, imbued in the child at this moment through this ritual and through these words. And it sets up this very particular relationship, a reciprocal relationship between the child and the community and the natural environment, right? So, the child is the environment is the child. And so, to inhabit one's skin in this context, right, has, it implications on a number of different levels. And so then, right, talking about what this means poetically, right, to give skin to words. One does this, right, so that the words have this kind of palpable existence and so that they endure, right? I mentioned, a minute ago, talking about how words do things, right? This is, from MEPA philosophy, right? This is specifically that, right? How the words in a particular context have, give life to things. They impact the community. And talking about then this particular poetics of hunger, right? Hubert was talking about, how this functions, right? So it is to bring the rain, right? So that the rain comes and drive hunger out, right? This is the purpose of these kinds of words that would be given in this ritual context, right? And of course, as all of this implies, it's not that simple, right? Like we would think of it in a Euro-Western context. Okay, drive hunger out, bring the rain, right? The words are given this kind of flesh, given this kind of skin, to guarantee the broader life and continuance of the community itself, right? And so there's this relationship between the words being given this skin and, their relationship with the community in a sense, that they are also the community and, how all of these things tie together. And so, he kind of ended by saying, it's fundamental, right? That in terms of giving words this kind of skin, right? That the words are therefore cared for, right? And that, the words then, in being cared for, crafted in this particular way, the words through things like driving out hunger, bringing the rain so that then there are crops, that the words also care for the community. And so, all of these reciprocal relationships are articulated at the same time through this kind of poetics. So thank you.
Almost, links back, Paul, to, the Vedic goddess of speech that Amit read a poem on, because Vach is sacred, in our ancestral texts and hymns. So it's, although in a very different way, but obviously very, very sacred. So I had a question, Amit, for you, which is, I don't mean it in an obvious way because I mean it in a non-obvious way because it could be obvious. But I know from your biography that you're also a practicing doctor, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm just curious about how your medical profession, vocation, what does it give to your poetry?
Sure. I am a physician, but I'm a very specific subtype of physician, which is I'm a radiologist. And that is not the typical type of doctor that people think about when they think about a doctor. So when people think about a doctor, they think about someone who has an office and patients come to them and they talk to the patient and they treat them and this and that. I'm a radiologist, so I actually work in front of a giant computer screens, high resolution computer screens. And then these really, really, hundreds of images get sent to me. And I basically, if you saw me working, I would have a dictaphone in one hand, and I would basically be scrolling endlessly through these hundreds and hundreds of images of the human body and preparing a report, in real time verbally. And then that gets transcribed on a separate screen using a special software. And then then I sign off on it, and then I move on to the next patient, So it's not so much experiential or like the encounter with people or with human suffering or anything like that it brings to my writing. I think that what it brings is observation and precision. So when you're creating a radiology report, you have to be very, very precise in what you describe, and you have to observe very closely, you have to watch very closely, and looking and describing is a big part of poetry and a big part of literature, I think. And so, probably the majority of what I write in a given year is actually radiology reports, but I think it bleeds over into what I do as a writer, because you have to pay a lot of attention to your words when you're writing poetry, but you have to pay even more attention to what you do when you're creating a radiology report, because they can sue you if you make a mistake in that. So yeah, I think attention to language, attention to what I'm looking at, and precision in articulation. I mean, those are the three things that medicine brings to my writing, I think.
Thank you. Paul, did you want to briefly translate that for Celerina and Hubert?
Pues les estaba pasando eso en el Face.
Goirik asked a question. You can take that after this.
Can he just finish that? Because it's directly linked to what Amit said. He's just translating.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Decía el compañero que eso tiene mucho que ver, la escritura, con su oficio de ser un médico, ¿no? Porque, pero no tanto por la inspiración en el sufrimiento humano, sino que él particularmente es un radiólogo, ¿no? Y tiene que generar reportes que se basen en la precisión y la observación. Y es por eso, ¿no? Él practica eso en la vida diaria, en este oficio, y por eso él labora llevar a la observación y la precisión a las palabras que usa en su poesía y en su escritura.
Okay, someone had a question?
Yeah, but before that, Shaladeep, do you want to ask a question, and maybe we can take this after that? There's a question that someone sent to me, maybe by accident in a direct message. But Shaladeep says he has a question, so do you want to ask first?
I think I've already spoken. We can take Goirik's question first.
Go ahead, Bharat.
Are you sure? Okay. Still sounds so beautiful to the ears. Why do some languages sound so sweet to the ears? Is the question. Maybe that's a difficult question to answer because that's a subjective experience. But I was wondering, Paul, if you might, as someone who moves between Spanish and English, if you could maybe just say something about the difference in the sonority of these languages and what that means for the work of translation.
Also, can I quickly add just one layer to that question, which is sure. Because Paul translates from Spanish, but Hubert writes in Mayfair. So how does that work in terms of the translation practice? And yeah.
Yeah, so these are really fantastic questions, right? And sort of moving sort of across them. So a lot of the literatures that are produced by indigenous communities in the Americas right now tend to be published in bilingual editions, right? not always, right? And so particularly with translation, this presents a number of challenges in terms of, there is no translator, for example, who can capably translate from all 60 plus indigenous languages that are currently spoken in Mexico, right? And so I think this begins with recognizing one's own limitations, right? Like I was saying earlier, with both Celerina and Uber, I work heavily directly from the Spanish and then heavily consulting with the poets, right? When there are images I don't understand, how do then you bring that into English? Because I can translate fairly capably from Yucatec, less so from Tzotzil. I can, parse out words, things like that, and translate from both simultaneously. The other sort of challenge there is these are not necessarily, the poets aren't necessarily translating their work, right? Writing it in Mepa, for example, and then translating that work into Spanish. Usually the metaphors used are the works have two hearts. It's the same poem, but they have two hearts, right? In different languages, and how one negotiates that. Or I think Arturo Arias has referred to them as trans creations. Other people have talked about is bilanguaging, right? And so we have to kind of like simultaneously read the poem in multiple languages all at once, if that makes sense, right? Before we even then translate. And so I think this presents challenges as translations, but I think this also brings us closer together. I think increasingly translators, we're working sort of in community with multiple of us, right? Having our hands on translation projects, all working very closely with the authors themselves, which I think is something really beautiful. But part of that, right, one of the things that is, I always tell people about this and joke with this in the United States, right, is there are sounds in indigenous languages spoken throughout the hemisphere that don't exist in Spanish, but then but that actually do exist in English. Right. And so this, for translation, right, and speaking, sonically, presents some opportunities, right? And I'll give you just one very quick example. Tzotzil, right? That TS sound at the beginning of the word and in the middle of the word, tzotzil, it's the same sound at the end of the English word cats. And so, right, when you're translating from tzotzil, there are things you can do in English, frankly, that you can't do in Spanish because it's not there. Playing with those kinds of sounds, right? Even though that the TS doesn't exist as an initial. And so, and I know my colleagues, Wendy Call and Claire Sullivan, have both talked about that, right? And they both do a wonderful job translating poets from Mesoamerica as well. And so in terms of like the sonic qualities, right? I think that this is, again, something that the poets are very attuned to, right, in terms of the possibilities in their own languages, particularly as they carry this philosophical weight, right, using this kind of poetic language in those languages that in Spanish may or may not be there, because the possibilities of Spanish are different. And even though a friend of mine, Yucatec Maya anthropologist Henry Yanes Ortiz, talks about how the performance of works in some of these languages can even be beautiful if you don't speak the language, right? You can just listen to it and you can hear it, right? That there's a lot of meaning in the performance and just hearing the sound, right? And meaning and how that's communicated that way. So thank you for those questions. I think that's really fantastic.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. Sharadeep, you want to ask your question? I think we might have to end it after that. It's 8:31. So.
Sure. Thanks very much. I absolutely enjoyed the conversation almost as much as the readings. My question to Celerina is about like a very specific poem. First, like my admiration for her poem Hands. I think that there are certain poems when you read as a poet, you wish you had written, but also understand that you couldn't have. It's only written by another hand, so to say. I was interested, in the tactility of work and hands in that poem, whereas so much of modern work takes away tactility. My own work as an academic would take away, say for instance, tactility from my work. So what is the relationship in some senses between that very tactile understanding of hands work with labor, with doing something?
Thank you, Shuradeep. I'm gonna translate that now. Celerina, pues precisamente el compañero Shuradeep tiene una pregunta acerca de tu poema Manos, ¿no? Y dice que de vez en cuando estás leyendo un poema, una serie de poemas, y pues ya empiezas a pensar, ¿no? Yo deseo que yo hubiera escrito ese poema, ¿no? Y dice que tiene ese sentimiento acerca del poema de Manos, ¿no? Que es poderoso. Y la pregunta tiene que ver con el uso de las manos, ¿no? Y cómo en el poema el labor tiene un sentido palpable, ¿no? Que en el trabajo moderno ya no tenemos, que mencionó, por ejemplo, el trabajo académico, que es un académico y que no participa en el trabajo de la misma forma, ¿no? Como se asoma en este poema. Y que hemos perdido esa relación en el mundo, entre comillas, moderno, que tienen nuestras manos con el trabajo, ¿no? Con la experiencia, y que no es tan palpable como aparece en este poema. Y si tú podrías darnos un comentario acerca de esta relación entre el trabajo y las manos.
Muchas gracias. Pues más bien este poema está dedicado a mi madre porque pues ella me enseñó muchas cosas y que toda la vida ella ha usado su mente, pero también sus manos para materializar todo aquello, ¿no? En mi región, cuando uno está chico, pues se usa el rebozo, ese paño que nos cargan y nos sirve para estar con nuestra madre, para también cuando ya no estamos chiquitos, nos sirve para taparnos con el del sol. Y viendo a esta mujer que es mi madre, decidí hacer un escrito acerca de las maravillosas manos que efectivamente los seres humanos de repente nos olvidamos, ¿no? Y que es una parte tan fundamental en todos, ¿no? Si uno se lastima un dedo, se da cuenta de la importancia de todos esos elementos que tiene nuestra mano y que nos sirven. En mi lengua no existe la cuestión de decir como dedos, ¿no? Sino cada dedo, que se conoce como en el español, es la cabeza de la mano. Entonces, en realidad, la mano tiene 5 cabezas, ¿no? Y eso hace que pueda moverse con nuestra mente maravillosamente para tejer, para bordar, para hacer tortillas, para sembrar, para recoger la cosecha, para muchas, muchas cosas, nuestra vida, pues. Y bueno, en eso está inspirado Manos.
Perfecto. Tejer y bordar. Perfecto. No, muchas gracias, Celerina. Muchas gracias. And so, like talking about this poem, right? This is a poem that Celerina has dedicated specifically to her mother, right? Who, you know, taught her a number of different things, right? And the transmission of knowledge that, again, in Oaxaca or tends to happen, right? In the house, things like that. And so, you know, this use of the hands with work is something, you know, that she observed, right? You know, from her mother, right? And of course, but also like it's specifically, and I think this speaks to your question, right? The knowledge that her mother holds and transmits, right? And that she uses, right, in this work that she does with her hands. And she mentioned specifically, for example, the rebozo, which is a long woven scarf that is, again, is used in many communities throughout Mesoamerica, that from the time a child is young, right, can be used to carry a child, right, to do a number of things with a child. And then, of course, right, as for example, a young woman grows up, you can even use it, right, to cover your head from the sun, right? So it's this kind of garment, right? And I'll kind of give an aside there. It's also, you know, it reflects the body of the weaver itself in terms of the tensions of the threads, and in terms of knowledge, right? The designs that might be on the rebozo in terms of cosmology, philosophy, all of this is embedded in the rebozo. And so, she writes this about these amazing hands that her mother has, right? And, and to your question again, this is the kind of knowledge that we are losing and don't think of a lot, right? And she's like, and you immediately think of it, however, when you hurt one of your fingers, right? Or something like that, right? And then you're very aware of your hands. And in New Sabi, right, which is her language, also known as Mixteco, there's not necessarily a word that we would translate like as finger in Spanish. It literally means the head of your hands, right? And so each hand has 5 heads, right? And so again, getting with this knowledge which is embedded in there, and that you use this knowledge, right, which is reflected directly then in the hands through this metaphor, to plant, to harvest, to weave, to embroider, to make tortillas, and all of these sorts of things. And so, the hands themselves are also, literally articulated through language as being the site of this kind of knowledge. So thank you.
Wow.
Wow. Thank you very much, Celerina, for that answer, and Paul for your wonderful translation. Can I ask one quick question to Ari? I know we are.
Everyone is okay with it. It's a fantastic conversation, of course.
Yeah, Ari, there's something about the quality of your reading, the way you read your poems, that I think gives a lot of meaning to it. And this is from my memory of your reading, hearing you live, as well as now. I'm thinking that, and since you also are a dramatist, is there something about, the way you would write your lines as dialogue, and the way you write your poems? What do you think is the relationship, in some sense, in your sort of dramatic writing practice and your very sort of Walt Whitman-esque lines in your poetry?
Yeah, well, I think there's 3 things operating there. One is the dramatic, yes, just your words have to be both events on paper, but also events as you communicate those words through gesture, through your mouth, through your lungs somehow. Secondly, it's the rhythm comes from breathing, and the breaks are breathing breaks that you learn from oral traditions if you listened carefully. And originally, my poems, whenever there was a breathing, I had a hyphen there until my publisher said, "Stop it now, enough, we understand." So these timing, breathing, rhythm are very, very important. And then it's always an attempt to put together the seemingly irreconcilable things that appear in front of you, in trying to put them together because they're happening together. And they're happening together very fast, and trying to capture, not in the sense that surrealists captured in constructing it through language, but in trying to make language, trying to deal with the out there that remains incomprehensible, that escapes you all the time, that is in your face, and trying to always put it together. So that gives it energy. So it's those 3 things that I think operate. Perhaps there are other things, but we don't spend much time as poets reflecting on the methodology. It happens most of the time. But I think those are the 3 things that operate when I compose. Yeah.
That's very nicely said, Ari. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah.
So I think, I just wanted to ask my team, Bharat, I know that we're going to be putting this, it's available online, but I honestly think today's event was stunning. And I think that we should showcase it in our upcoming issue in November, we should put a link to this event. Because for anyone who's missed this, I mean, I feel sorry for them because I just think it was amazing. So let's do that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And we can put it right at the head of the editorial for the next.
Absolutely, yeah.
So thank you very, very much, Celerina and Hubert. Thanks, Paul, for your wonderful translation and your simultaneous interpretation almost that you had to do. Thank you so much, Ari. Thank you, Amit. Thank you, Shoradeep, for reading your poem, which I've been seeing over the many drafts that you had. Thanks, Mantra, for getting it all together. Shomok and Bharat for all the organization. And really hope to see and meet all of you in person someday. Ari is the only one I've met already. Amit, hopefully, when I'm in the States next. Maybe Paul. And I don't know if I'll ever get to Mexico, but it was just wonderful to have you both.